Hi everyone, a warm welcome to our speakers and our audience on the YouTube Live. My name is Afra, I am the head of AIR Dialogue. AIR Dialogue aims to facilitate dialogue on a whole range of social issues. We stand for democracy, human rights, equality, and freedom of speech. At AIR Dialogue, we understand dialogue to involve meaningful interaction and exchange between people of different groups who came together through various kinds of conversations or activities to increase understanding. Today, we mark this date to focus on breaking the bias as a Women's Day special panel discussion. This panel will focus on improving the balance between women and men in decision-making positions in Ireland, especially in the political, economic, and social affairs. We will talk about how to break stereotypes, what role do men play in terms of improving gender balance, what is the impact of the pandemic on gender equality? What does the Irish government do to improve gender equality? We are honored to have five speakers today joining us who will share their insights on this matter. There are mainly three sections of this panel. First, each panelist will share insights for 10 minutes. After the speech, panelists could ask each other questions according to the speech content. Then it is a Q&A section when we select questions from the audience. The panel will last for 1 hour in total. If you hope to hear more from us, you're very welcome to subscribe to our channel and feel free to ask questions or make comments through the YouTube live chat. With this, I would like to give the mic to Jovantika, who is the founder of International Women in Tech, entrepreneur and speaker. Stage is yours, Jovantika.
Thanks, Afra. Hi, everybody. First of all, I wanted to wish you all a very happy International Women's Day. I know it's kind of a big deal, Women's Day, but I think we should celebrate it every day and not just 8th of March. So thanks again, Afra and Team AIR Dialogue for inviting me to this panel. And I'm so glad to be sharing this panel with so many amazing people in here. My name is Jovantika. I am a cloud solution architect in Microsoft, and I am also a founder of International Women in Tech Group. I lead a group of around 4,000 members. So this group, as you can see the name International, it's global. There are people from all over the world. It's not just Ireland. It's a non-charity organization that I started on my personal experience when I came to Ireland to do my master's. I did face a lot of racism, sexism, and lack of opportunities to work, being a female, being early in the career, being young in the career. I stepped into leadership at really early age. I was a former CTO in one of the logistics in Ireland where I have been working, where I worked with the whole male dominant environment. So it was quite challenging for me. And I thought it's not just me, there are so many other women out there who are looking for support, who are looking for some encouragement, some female role models and mentors to guide them through their journey. So I thought it's the best platform because I faced myself that even though if I wanted a mentor or an advice, I have been asked to pay for that 30 minutes or 20-minute session in order to get an advice. And at that point, I didn't feel that I am comfortable or I would be able to afford that much to get a mentor or an advice. So that's why I started this group so that everybody people like me can come together, seek help, or take advantage of the experience of a lot of women have outside. So it's not just about a successful leader, but also early in their careers, graduates, freshers who are looking for job, who are still struggling. I started this coffee chat with Jovantika where I talk with people, all kind of people, from leaders to younger generations as well, and help them, guide them in terms of career. And also it's a 30 minutes coffee chat. I do not pay, I do not ask for anything, or I do not expect from them except determination and the time that they are giving to me. So I think it's been quite a journey for me. I have seen a lot of things that at an early age. I have been in that position at an early age, and I feel privileged to be helping others who are on the same path. For me, International Women in Tech is a passion, is a love of mine that I do apart from my full-time role. And I am on a mission to help as many people as I can out there. It's not just about helping women. We don't want to bring the same thing back again where we are being dominant over male now, but it's about gender equality. It's about the true color of feminism rather than the negative meaning of feminism. So that's what I am supporting. And I do feel that we need to talk about this. We are still celebrating International Women's Day because there is a need to celebrate it. We are still undermined. Women are still undermined in tech industries, and we need role models. We need male allies. We need male advocate to guide us, to mentor us, because that's how the gender gap will be filled. I know a lot of people say that we need women mentors more, but that's true on some part. I would say it's equally important to have a male advocate by your side. I have mentors, male mentors more than female mentors. So it's not always right that you need to have just one mentor, but we can have multiple mentors on different aspects. So I guess I do have multiple mentors, and maximum of them are male. And I am so proud to call them as my mentors because they have been guiding me in such a right direction. I do feel that a leader is a successful leader who actually help others become a leader. So that's the mission that I am also in there. I know I'm not in that position to guide somebody to become a leader, but I think I can give back what I have experienced and what I have learned being a woman in tech and facing all the problems and reaching to a successful career where I am now, and also looking forward to more. So the theme, breaking the bias, I guess it's one of the most important theme for today's International Women's Day. And I guess a lot of us talk about it, a lot of us go through unconscious bias in our day-to-day life, which we are unaware of. Some or the other way we do have an unconscious bias in our mind. So how do we remove that? How do we become optimistic towards that biased nature of ours, even though we do not know that we are following that? So I guess so it's so important to talk currently about this in the market, rather than talking about women empowerment, rather than talking about women in technology. I guess it's high time to talk about both. It's high time to talk about male mentors for females. It's high time to talk about vice versa, and bring together, as a strong allies for each other, where male is having a female mentor and a female is having a male mentor, and again it works on both ways. So yeah, I am strong support towards it, and I am so much looking forward to hear the perspective of the other panelists, and to discuss how maybe together we can bring this in front of the society and change a little bit of perception out there from the negative biases to the positive one.
Thank you so much, Juventika. I think what you're doing, the mentoring part, is super important to encourage women to get out of their comfort zone and also look for more opportunities within as a leader. Thank you so much for doing this. I know you're like really even like doing the mentoring session during the weekends as well. I think this is a very important support for a lot of women. With this, I also would like to announce that Juventika, as organization International Women in Tech, is also holding a nice International Women's Day event on Friday, 2:30. Reach out to her if you're interested. They will. The main concept is about celebrating the little achievements of women. It's a very nice, meaningful event to join if you're interested. Thank you. Our second speaker is Kathryn Lane. She is an officer at the International Women's Council. The stage is yours, Kathryn.
Thank you. Thanks, Afra. Hello, everybody. Happy International Women's Day. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel discussion this evening, and to be here with you just to share some of my thoughts. So just a little bit about the National Women's Council. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we're the leading national representative organisation for women and women's groups in Ireland, founded in 1973. So next year we'll be celebrating 50 years. We have over 190 member groups and a large and growing community of individual supporters. The ambition of the National Women's Council is an Ireland where every woman enjoys true equality and no woman is left behind. This ambition shapes and informs our work, and with our living values, how we work. We are a movement building organisation rooted in our membership, working on the whole island of Ireland. We are also part of the international movement to protect and advance women's and girls' rights. Our purpose is to lead action for the achievement of women's and girls' equality through mobilising, influencing and building solidarity. International Women's Day is a key day in our feminist calendar, and it's a really important time to recognise the achievements that have been made for women and the personal and collective struggles which have been required to achieve these goals. This International Women's Day, we're hearing a strong chorus of women's voices coming together for change. It's a time for women around the world to commemorate their struggles and celebrate their achievements. It marks women's efforts over the years to attain justice and equality for themselves and their children. International Women's Day originated from the trade union movement in America in the early 20th century, particularly in the activism of the women who worked in the clothing industry sweatshops of the time. In 1907, the women held a hunger march in New York in protest at the dangerous working conditions and very long working periods, calling for a 10-hour working day and improved wages. The police attacked the march, and the following year, on March 8, 1908, a commemorative march was held, which became a milestone in women's history. This date is what we now celebrate as International Women's Day, and by 1911, it had become international. In Ireland, International Women's Day grows every year. Today, on this International Women's Day, we think about the women and people of Ukraine. It is expected that up to 4 million people will flee Ukraine, the majority of whom are women and children. We are calling on EU leaders and the international community to include women at every stage of the processes to strive for peace in Ukraine. Women's voices and women's civil society must be heard, consulted, and shape current and post-conflict solutions. This is vital in all parts of the world where conflict continues. We know that this invasion will have a long-term effect not only on Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, but across Europe. We remain in strong solidarity with Ukrainian people in Ukraine and in Ireland. We just to say, we have a list of organisations on our website that are providing humanitarian aid if people are interested in finding out some more. So just thinking about stereotypes and how we can break gender stereotypes. When we think about women and men in society, we know that they've been assigned certain roles. And because of those roles, we experience life differently. We experience employment and unemployment differently, home life differently, health differently, and so on. We have different requirements when being provided a service or being supported by an employer or the state. And women can experience multiple disadvantages because of their age, their class, disability, or ethnic status. Before we can continue to work to achieve gender equality, we believe we need to have a shared understanding of the discrimination and inequality women currently face. Women are more likely to earn less and be less financially secure, be employed in casual part-time work, undertake the majority of unpaid work in the home, experience violence from their partner, be the victims of sexual assault, and experience anxiety and depression. Clearly, these are not the features of a gender equal society. Recently, a report was published by the Department of Children, Equality, Integration and Youth before Christmas on gender norms. Attitudes continue to restrict and limit the roles men and women play in Irish society. In that report, 52% surveyed believe that the most important role of a woman is to take care of her home and family. 16% of those asked believed that women do not have the necessary qualities and skills to fill positions of responsibility in politics. I'm sharing a direct quote now from this report. Men are considered natural leaders, leading to widespread social norms questioning women's ability to lead. Women who do gain access to leadership positions are also often expected to emulate men to prove themselves as leaders, and often have to take on a higher burden of work than male leaders to gain the same recognition. This can lead to women refraining from applying and pursuing these roles, contributing to the underrepresentation of women in leadership positions and reinforcing the belief that men make better leaders. In a survey of fifth-year students, the girls said that they feel that they need to be more powerful, ambitious, confident, and intelligent to be leaders. This is the difference between the qualities they have and how they perceive leaders to be. Ireland has not had a female head of state or head of government over the past 10 years, and was the country with the third smallest share of women in local government in the European Union in 2018. We know that only when women are equally represented in all facets of society will that society be then operating at its strongest and at its best. In terms of the role men can play in improving gender balance, a key role is supporting men to share the caring role in families and in communities. We know that almost 1 in 2 fathers did not avail of their paid paternity benefit in 2018. This must become the norm in workplaces, that fathers are availing of family-friendly leave. This can be achieved by increasing the duration of paid parental leave and increasing other parents' benefit payments as well to enable workers to avail of these family-friendly practices. I'm going to share an example with you recently on the international stage of where a man called out inequality and stood alongside women. And we know men really need to champion these issues. Some of you will have already seen this. It was covered in the media that recently at the European Council, there was an EU-Africa summit, and Ugandan Foreign Minister General JJ Odongo, he confidently moved to shake the hands of the 2 men who were standing to greet him. In doing so, he breezed past Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, who was first in the lineup. The Ugandan Foreign Minister moved past her to shake hands with France's President Emmanuel Macron and the European Council President Charles Michel. So Macron, after many awkward seconds, pointed Odongo in the direction of the head of the Commission, and then he did finally acknowledge her but didn't shake her hand. So it's really important that these types of incidences do not go unnoticed or unchecked. And a woman at that level, in public life, still has to be, I suppose, treated differently or treated maybe like a second-class citizen. Also, we know in Ireland, we still have listed companies with all male boards. So in those situations, it's really important where men are in those spaces, they're on committees, on boards, in all decision-making structures, they're asking, where are the other women? And also, where is the diversity among the men in the room as well? Also, men can take on a role in terms of supporting women to run for office. They can support her campaign, they can canvass for her, they can look after the house, look after family, help her with care and responsibilities so that she can then take on that active role in public and political life. In terms of the impact of the pandemic on gender equality, we know already there's many systematic inequalities and barriers to achieving full equality, particularly on women from marginalised communities. Women have fewer resources, wealth and capital to fall back on in times of crisis, and these existed before the pandemic. The pandemic has exacerbated many of those, but it also shone a light on issues like unpaid care work and on the essential sectors that were affected in the low paid work in which women predominate. The pandemic highlighted that the male breadwinner model still prevails in Ireland. Individualisation of social welfare payments coupled with increasing payments above the poverty line would fundamentally reform our social welfare system and finally replace our outdated male breadwinner model with a model that works for women. The pandemic showed us what was possible. No public or private divide in healthcare, the state playing a crucial role in protecting incomes, livelihoods and public health. We know that school and childcare closures put extra pressure on many women to look after their families and loved ones, especially challenging for lone parents. Many women in precarious jobs before the pandemic lost their jobs. Women in abusive relationships were under lockdown with their abusers. Many older women living alone were cocooning and isolated, and women living in nursing homes were really concerned about their health. With many health services overstretched and charities under-resourced, women's sexual and reproductive health services, as well as prenatal and postnatal care, were disrupted. Most frontline health workers are women, but they don't always have a voice in the high-level decision-making. Women are still underrepresented at high levels of health authorities, in government cabinets internationally and in Ireland. We know the pandemic will have long-term implications on the safety, well-being and livelihood of girls and women. It's vitally important as we seek to live alongside this virus that our gender lens supports us to recognise girls and women's needs. In terms of what the Irish government can do to improve gender equality, they have responsibility for implementation and delivery of the National Strategy for Women and Girls. They need to track progress across a number of areas. They need to establish a baseline of where we're at and then set ambitious targets. For example, 50-50 gender balance in government by 2030. In order to achieve that, we would urgently need quotas to be introduced to local government elections and for targeted measures to be introduced to support minority women candidates. There is a very clear direction to government on how to increase women's leadership in society, and implementing quotas combined with providing maternity and paternity leave for all elected representatives would be transformative to achieve gender equality in Irish politics. Public childcare is key. The state needs to have a greater role in the provision of childcare in this country, as requested in the Citizens' Assembly on Gender Equality, which reported last year. A public childcare model is the best way to ensure quality, accessibility, and affordability for parents. If women are to have real choices about work outside the home and participation in the labour market, there needs to be a sustainable and affordable model of childcare in Ireland in line with EU standards. A public model must also provide for improved pay and conditions for childcare workers, the majority of whom are women. The affordability crisis impacts lone parents hardest and is a core cause of the gender pay gap, as costs push women out of the paid workforce and also mean women are more likely to end up in low paid and precarious work. It can mean when women return to work, they are less likely to get promoted. More broadly, the work and welfare systems require reform to ensure active labour market policy works for women and supports transitions in and out of work, that women have individualised access to payments and supports, that it supports decent work, it's compatible with care, that it addresses poverty, and particularly the increased poverty experienced by travellers, disabled people and women parenting alone, and that it provides sufficient pension income to women in retirement. Women remain poorly represented across all sectors of society, and last year's Citizens' Assembly showed people don't want soft measures, they want quotas for local elections, Seanad elections, European Parliament and gender balance on boards. These recommendations are groundbreaking and they send a strong and clear signal to government and all decision makers that women's equality needs to be at the centre of our constitution, our legislation and our policies. The recommendations have the potential to really transform women's and girls' lives in this country and include the key elements that we need to achieve gender equality. And finally, there can be no equality for women without a transformation in how violence against women is addressed, to protect women and to hold perpetrators to account. The government will launch a new national strategy on gender-based violence in the next few weeks. This requires high ambition, clear leadership and responsibility at the highest level of government. So just to conclude for my introduction, sometimes when we do talk about women, we do think about the bad things that happen to women. But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we are a powerful group. We all have different experiences and perspectives. We're resilient and we have achieved considerable change. We can learn from and support one another. Days like today enable us to celebrate all the women in our lives who support and care for us, and to think about our own resilience, to celebrate our abilities and achievements. I think it's really important to foreground women's resilience, power and courage when we speak about women. We don't give ourselves enough credit that we can find the answer ourselves in conversations with others and through reflection on our own life experiences to bring about change. As women, we play so many different roles. We're mothers, advocates, daughters, sisters, campaigners, aunts, grandmothers, and every day in our different roles, we care for our families, we seek change, we make serious decisions that will affect our lives and the lives of our loved ones. And in the Women's Council, we've always believed that the only way to create positive change that works for women is to listen to what women have to say. Change is possible for women's equality, but it will only happen through a vibrant and exciting women's movement. So I hope you can join the National Women's Council and become part of that feminist change in Ireland. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kathryn, for sharing some important data that is showcasing the current situation of equality in Ireland. And myself, I'm a member of the National Women's Council. They have really nice events to join. Please check their websites where you can see the events that's on for March. And I just want to say, I think the best way of improving equality is actually women lifting women up and men being a woman ally. With this, I would like to give the mic to Pat, who is a change advocate, strategist, and the capacity builder.
Thanks very much. And thank you very much for inviting me along this evening. And it's a great honor to be part of a panel to mark International Women's Day, and just to express solidarity to all of you and to on the panel, and indeed to everybody who's listening and looking in. And I suppose what I want to focus on is the whole issue about women involved in political life, because as you mentioned, I'm involved in the whole as a change advocate, and I've been doing that through my own consultancy for the last 30 years. And indeed, I suppose I've been involved in political life for over 40 years here in Ireland. And I think the thing that sort of has always struck me, but particularly over the last 10 years, it's always been, I suppose from a personal experience point of view, I've always experienced, and I suppose it's only over the last 10 years I've become really conscious of it, but I've always experienced a sort of an open door for me. But it's very interesting, and I suppose I will share some particular experiences I've had that have led me to reflect on this a lot, is how the similar sort of encouragements and supports and whatever that I've received over those 4 decades and more have not been present. Or I've seen how women are responded to in very different ways, and the sort of obstacles that are there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my own observations about that, but also then some of the research that's around that, and some of the things then that we need to do, some of which Kathryn has already spoken about. And I should add as well that part of, I suppose, my thinking on this too is informed by the fact that I have 2 daughters, both of whom are activists, and you know, they've experienced, I suppose, blockages that I wouldn't have experienced when I was their age. And that's something that I'm very, I suppose, very conscious of. It's part of the reason too why I'm involved. You'll see over my shoulder here, more women. Why I'm involved in doing a lot of training work with Women for Election. And I've also as well too, I was involved in developing and drawing up their current strategic plan as well, which is very much focused on bringing more women into Irish political life. And I suppose it's important to reflect that our Dáil, which is the major elected national representative forum, 23% of the members of that are women. Now, it's worth noting that that is a slight improvement, but only a very slight improvement on what went before. So we're sort of stuck at the moment at less than a quarter. And given that over 50%, just slightly over 50% of the population are women, it shows that there's a big gap between the number of women in society and the number of women then elected to high office. And likewise too, that then is not surprisingly reflected in the number of women who are ministers and hold senior political roles. And it is critical that that's addressed. Why? Because who is in the room when decisions are made, first of all, decides what the agenda is. So what issues are taken seriously and what are not. And obviously decides then as well what decisions are taken. So it's really important that our politics accurately reflects our society from the point of view of gender, but also ethnicity, social class, and in various other ways. Because there's no doubt about it, our politics is overwhelmingly male, but it's also overwhelmingly white, and it's overwhelmingly middle class. And in fact, certain professions are way overrepresented. For example, teachers, lawyers. Why? Because they have time, they have money, and also too, coming back to what was said earlier on, they have lots of role models that sort of makes it both possible and, I suppose, probable that they're going to go down that particular route. So just a sort of a little thing about my own experience, because in the last decade, for over a couple of years, I was involved just working more at the center of politics for a couple of years. And I was involved in working with one of the women leaders in government at the time, not in terms of her government role, but in terms of her political role. And one of the things that was really stunning, and I remember seeing it, was how people, men who, when dealing with her predecessor, if her predecessor said jump, their response would be absolutely, immediately, and how high do you want me to jump? To when this woman leader said it, then the response, as one person said, was, well, I've learned to only act when she says it for the third time. And that was somebody who was in a senior office holder said, and this person was generally referred to as that fucking woman. And so it was, I was blown away by that, genuinely really shocked by the open misogyny from people who ticked all the right-on policy boxes. So they voted for all the right things. They believed in all of this stuff, but their behavior, their language, I remember going to meetings where if a woman spoke, that the sort of, and it was a very highly charged, testosterone-laden environment where the language was appalling. And you know, if a woman spoke, they were literally was this like jumping in. And I remember actually then complaining about that and said, listen, this is totally inappropriate behavior. And the response was, yeah. Do you know what? You don't need to go to those meetings anymore. That was the response, rather than actually deal with the culture that was so prevalent. Likewise, again, coming back to this leader that I worked with, she had a particular approach. Like a lot of women, she liked to consider things. She liked to get lots of different perspectives before she would make a decision. So she liked to consult. And that was then seen as that she was indecisive, that she couldn't make decisions. And again, it was just a diminution of actually a different way of doing business was seen as ineffective, indecisive. And that in many ways, just that approach was a blockage to things being done. So I suppose that really was a real shock to my system, because to be frank, they weren't values or approaches that I shared or was comfortable with. But I suppose that what shocked me was just how prevalent they were. And the sort of hostility that is then also seen, and we do see it, and there's lots of evidence of it, that the sort of, even how media portrays women leaders or women involved in public life, and social media, we've seen all of that, the sort of targeting that goes on, that there is no question that women are treated in a different way. Women in public life are treated very differently from men. And there's a level of hostility and undermining and whatever there that is very apparent. So that's something that I have to say. So again, part of the reason why I'm involved with Women for Election, and as I say, the work I do is about a lot of it is how to campaign and how to get involved in politics. And I stress at the beginning of each session is, look, what I'm going to talk to you about is not how it should be, but it's how it is and how you can navigate what is a very male-dominated, male-orientated and hostile world largely hostile world towards women. So how do we break down the barriers? And I mean, Kathryn, you've already outlined some of them, that there are some very practical structural barriers that government can act upon, which are things like certainly issues around childcare is a big obstacle in terms of women being involved in politics. When meetings take place, how meetings actually are organized and conducted, they are things that can actually, they're not set in stone, they can be changed. And it's interesting that there's a government backbencher, Jennifer Carroll McNeil, for example, is taking up one of the proposals that's in a very interesting, if you go to the womenforelection.ie website, you'll see that there's a publication called More Women, the Changing Face of Politics, which actually is based on interviews with women in Irish politics and their experience of it and what making recommendations for change. And one of them, for example, is how voting takes place. For instance, there's no reason why voting can't take place remotely. At the moment, you have to be within the environs of Leinster House in order to vote. Likewise in councils. It would actually, now that we can do things as we are tonight remotely, there is no, and we're now moving towards hybrid working. Why can we not do voting in likewise? And that again would facilitate people, both men and women, by the way, to actually balance more readily domestic demands and the demands of that particular workplace. I think other things as well too that are big barriers are money. Money is a big requirement to run in politics. And that does then obviously militate against then poorer women as well from running for public office, and indeed poorer men as well. So money is a big obstacle. But other things as well too are the sort of supports. Women don't tend to, by and large, say, hey, I'm here, vote for me. Women, by and large, in the experience is generally like to be asked and encouraged. So I think that one of the things is that there needs to be much more proactive approach by the political parties and the political system to actually talking to women and encouraging women to go forward. And I speak as somebody who was a teacher in the mid-1980s. And I remember one of the things that I taught actually mixed, so it was boys and girls. And one of the things that consciously, and it was something that I learned in my teaching practice, was making sure that the girls and the boys got equal treatment, because boys were always, no, ask me. We're always the ones who put their hands up, and the girls tended to be quieter. But actually, there are ways in fact that you could make sure that everybody feels they're getting, and not just feels, but they are actually getting an equal chance to take part. So I think there are lots of different strategies in that report, but certainly finances, encouragement, but quotas are absolutely critical. And Kathryn was spot on and hit the nail on the head. The most important thing we can do to try and rebalance things in the short term is ensure that in the next local elections, that the quota, there's a 40% quota applies to the local elections, not just the next general election. Why? Because the pipeline of potential candidates, winnable candidates for the next general election will be created in the next local elections. So it's pointless having a 40% quota for the general election in 2025 if there's not equally a 40% quota for the local and European elections in 2024. That is absolutely crucial. And that's something practically that can be done. And I would encourage people to do it. Enough for the moment, because I know we've plenty of other speakers go on, and look forward to hearing what they have to say and to engaging in the chat afterwards. So thank you very much for the opportunity, and looking forward to hear what the rest have to say. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Pat, for sharing your experiences with us. I'm really looking forward to seeing beautiful Ireland having more women and also more diverse people in politics,
Absolutely.
which a much more healthy culture. Hope so.
Yes.
Next, we have Sarah Clavero. She is a postdoctoral researcher at TU Dublin and a senior researcher at the Equality, Diversity, Inclusion Directorate. Stage is yours.
Thank you, Afra. And I want to thank you and EIGE Dialogue for inviting me to this International Women's Day event this evening, and happy International Women's Day. Well, as Afra said, I am a senior researcher at the Directorate for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion in TU Dublin, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Research Centre for Inclusive and Equitable Cultures. Today I'm going to speak about the impacts of COVID-19 on gender representation in leadership and decision-making, not just in Ireland, but also in more broader in the European Union. I am aware, of course, that the pandemic these days is no longer in many people's minds, especially given the terrible events going on in Ukraine and the humanitarian crisis that is causing. However, many of the problems of the lack of women representation in leadership and decision-making that the COVID-19 crisis made much more visible equally apply to the multiple crises caused by this war. And so the lesson learned there from the pandemic can apply to present and future crises. Let me talk a little bit about myself and the project that I'm involved in. I'm involved in an EU-funded project. It's called Resistere, that investigates the impact of pandemic responses on gender plus inequalities. By gender plus, what we mean is an intersectional perspective that looks at the interactions of gender with other identities, such as social class, sexual orientation, race and ethnicity, ability, etc., in the production and reproduction of inequalities. So one of the domains we were looking and we are looking still in the project at different policy domains. And one of the domains we have been looking at is women in leadership and decision making. So for this, we collected a lot of data from lead reviews. We conducted a mapping and analysis of policy responses. We had interviews and workshops with experts, both from public authorities and civil society organizations. So what I'm going to do this evening is to share a little bit those findings with you, with regard specifically, as I said, to leadership and decision making. So we found that inequalities, gender inequalities in this domain, they indeed did increase during the COVID-19 crisis. And there were two different dimensions to this. On the one hand, there was an absence of women in leadership and decision-making, but on the other hand, we also found an absence of women's voices in explaining the pandemic to society. Mm. So to illustrate this, I'm going to give you some examples. To begin with, women were invisible in government COVID-19 task forces. I'm going to give you an example of an analysis of a study looking at the gender composition of 115 expert and decision-making COVID-19 task forces in 87 countries. And this study found that 85% of these groups were made up mostly of males, and that only 3.5% of those task groups had gender parity. So you could see here the huge gap. On the other hand, and secondly, women were also completely invisible in the media. especially as experts. So women's voices, women's opinion as experts were nowhere to be found or heard. In this respect, there is an interesting analysis of female experts in different domains mentioned in media stories. And it found that only 5% of STEM experts mentioned in the media were women. Only 15% of economy experts were women, and only 17% were politicians. Third, there was also a lack of consultation with civil society organizations, NGOs, in policy responses to the pandemic crisis. Yes, women NGOs were required to be engaged in the provision of frontline services, but they were excluded from decision making. And last but not least, isolation as a result of lockdowns, what we found in interviews, limited the opportunity of women to participate in politics, and I mean more broadly as mobilization. So the space for protest and mobilization was closed. So that space was not there. We look at the consequences. What are the consequences of this invisibility and lack of voice? And the most obvious consequences here is that emergency measures in response of the pandemic crisis did not take into account the gender impacts of the policies adopted. And the gender impacts of the pandemic were many, as you are Kathryn has been going through this already. Examples include there was an increase in domestic violence, there was huge impact on the burden of care, and there was also women's withdrawal from the labor market, and increased vulnerability of part-time workers and workers on temporary and 0 hours contracts and workers in the gig economy. And this is a very feminized collective, as you know. There were also increased levels of stress, of anxiety, and other mental health issues, just to name a few. Looking into the reasons, what are the reasons for this absence of women in leadership and decision-making during the pandemic? Well, many of these, they predate the COVID-19 crisis. And what the pandemic did is just to exacerbate a situation that was already there. And in a way, and this is a positive outcome, it make it more visible. So reasons that were there, there is this traditional model of society where the exclusions of women's vision and judgment and opinion continues to be acceptable. Also, there are deeply rooted assumptions about the gender division of labor, which sees women primarily as carers, as family carers, as frontline care, and especially in a situation of crisis. These stereotypes, let me add to this, also impacted on decisions based on what was considered to be essential services and what were not.
Yeah.
There is also these traditional gender stereotypes that portrays male as leaders and as saviors in the context of, there was a context of a war mentality during this pandemic. And this, in a way, also affected leadership. There was a shift in leadership styles where decision-making was concentrated in the hands of a small group of powerful people, mainly men. And it was justified with this war mentality on the grounds that we need like quick actions. So there was an emphasis on very rapid decision making by homogeneous and not diverse teams, and teams of very privileged white individuals. So inclusive decision making was treated as less adequate given those exceptional circumstances and the need for quick action. So what to do? We have, other panelists have touched on different quotas, candidate quotas, targets and quotas, women on boards, involvement, mentorship. So you have touched on what to do. But yeah, continue the struggle for more gender equal representation, both in decision making and inclusive leadership. It is an old struggle, so continue it. But also learn the lessons from the COVID-19 experience. And because there was good practice, it was not all bad practice, and share that good practices. There are good examples in this area. A lot of examples concentrate on tackling that increase on gender-based violence. And we see very good examples in different countries. At the municipal level, we see it in Sweden. At the national level, we see it in Ireland as well, with the Still Here campaign, which a national council participated, and it was a work of different, like it was a multi-sector initiative. And also another nice example comes from Lithuania. And Lithuania, because in many countries during the pandemic, there were not elections. But in Lithuania, there was an election. There was an election in 2020 that brought to the government a more equal government. So that, in a way, the consequence of that more equal parity government brought important changes to early pandemic responses. And in a way, what it is making those responses more gender sensitive. So there are about what to do. We can discuss this more later if we have time during the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks a million, Sarah, for your data-driven talk. Stereotyping is still heavily on the screen, so this means that we still need a lot of awareness regarding this. Last but not least, I would like to give the word to Bucky, who is the Vice President for Equality and Citizenship at the Union of Students in Ireland.
Thank you so much, Afra, and thank you to all the previous speakers who spoke and laid down a lot of facts that are really stark, but very important to kind of note. As Afra mentioned, my name is Buki Adebowale, and I'm the Vice President for Equality and Citizenship at the Union of Students in Ireland. And just a brief kind of overview of what USI does, if I have time to kind of go into it, is that we are a body that represents over 374,000 students across the island of Ireland, both north and south. And we represent the student voice on various bodies, committees, government departments, and we do that in various policy aspects and areas, one of that being equality, another being citizenship, others being welfare, academic affairs, campaigns, and also quality assurance. There's a lot of work that we kind of do in the policy remit. And then we also have regional vice presidents who work on a one-to-one basis with different student unions that are affiliated with us. So just a bit of background about myself. So I actually began my journey into student politics roughly 5 years ago in a voluntary kind of contribution manner. And I ran for my first full-time sabbatical position as vice president for Student Life and Minute Students Union almost 2 years ago. And then afterwards, I slightly diverted into national elections within USI and ran for USI Equality and Citizenship. And my term has been roughly 8 to 9 months at this stage. And we always have very short terms. But it's been an amazing and very interesting one so far in all that I've learned. And I think working in student politics as a Black woman and has definitely shed a lot of light on the many barriers that nuanced kind of, backgrounds can face, especially women who have different kind of backgrounds that overlap, whether it's a woman with disability or a queer woman. It's a lot of different things that come into that space. And I think something that I really want to kind of bring forth is every year we have a student event and a student conference dedicated to self-identifying women across the island called Women Lead, which is something that inspires and encourages women to engage with like-minded people and have a safe space. And I think what's really, really interesting about this event in particular is when we talk about the space for fears when it comes to running for office, whether that be in your SU or in a leadership position, or even running for local or national elections, wherever that may be. And you would hear of the different stories of people who find it really nerve-wracking to put themselves out there. And I think for For some people, it's putting themselves in the spotlight, which is quite a real thing when you're putting yourself forward for any kind of political position, because you're being exposed and you're vulnerable for the public to see. And for me and other women, it's not being taken seriously as a woman. And for me as a Black woman, which had never been seen in the history of my unions, both of them at the time. And I think the narrative around leadership and women in leadership is really, really thwarted, and it stems from the way we're taught and our education systems and institutions across the board. I think we've been taught these narratives from the get-go that, you know, it's really important for us to kind of dismantle them from the root, which is what, you know, being radical is and what radical activism actually truly means. So getting the conversation around stereotypes, I think, is a really interesting one. And I think how we I guess break those stereotypes is by talking and recognizing the facts, because what stereotypes is, you know, perception of what people may think. Sometimes they're true, sometimes they're not, and most of the times they aren't typically true. And being able to discern between that and a fact is important. And I think the acknowledgement that we need to obviously make is that women, we have made this acknowledgement already, and it's that women do thrive in areas like government, health, business, and, you know, and economy. And in some cases, this acknowledgement is truly genuine, and in others it's not, which is something that we have to acknowledge as well. And this can be seen through the fact that we have a whole sustainable development goal that's dedicated to gender equality and empowering women. And where we fall short in recognizing barriers placed before women and the performative allyship that comes around it is there. So even according to the United Nations study looking at it, roughly 25% of women are in parliamentary positions. I know Pat had mentioned in Ireland it is 23%, and in 36% of women are in local government in you know, Europe, and then 28% are roughly in managerial positions. So all of this below 50%, which is really, really shocking to see, but not surprising as well. And so that what that means is that in your average government across the world, you'll see roughly 64% of those people are not women. They're making decisions on behalf of women. And that is stark. And I think the constant question that's being raised is, you know, how do we break these barriers? And I think it's important to start off by uprooting patriarchal norms that are in the places we are constantly asking women to occupy. So that means acknowledging and making sure that the spaces that we want women to enter, they're safe environments for them and gender non-conforming people to thrive in. And I think our government and several other governments have the opportunity to change those impact zones that affect women. For example, violence against women. You know, on average, globally, 1 in 3 women are subjected to sexual harassment or physical violence at least once before, after they turn 15. And that's really, really scary to think about, but is the reality of our society and the society that we live in today. We're also looking at a new age where social media makes it a lot easier to perpetuate violence. So in the pandemic, we look at the exacerbation of gender-based cyber violence, which has actually changed the scene of how much more damage can be done when it comes to women, and especially those who are in the public spotlight. So, for example, women in politics and even women in leadership positions as well. And I think there is a lot that the Irish government can do to make gender equality happen. And this can be from a lot of different aspects, and that includes policy making and policy action. And I'm really grateful for previous speaker, Kathryn from National Women's Council, for actually bringing up the National Strategy for Women and Girls, which is something that needs to be implemented. And, you know, looking at our legislation, it should most certainly focus on a more gender neutral country that does not leave anyone behind. And the spirit of our legislation should most certainly not fall short of the actions that we're promising. So this means looking at laws on equal pay, on parental leave, on, you know, childcare, healthcare, employment, education, reproductive health, and these are just to name a few of these things. But there's also power in not just our government as well. There's a collective empowerment here as well. It lies and falls on all of us, but of course things like employment, you know, employers and bodies that can form partnerships to increase gender equality, which is really important as well. So I think to really finish off and say that there is a lot, of course, that everyone can do, and everyone can play a huge role in ensuring that women are uplifted and elevated to the points that they need to be. But of course, I think women are only acknowledged because we've been so persistent and so consistent in raising our voices. And of course, you know, that's tiring at times, because oftentimes it does feel like sometimes we do want to give up, because a lot of the times we aren't listened to or we're not taken seriously. But I think it's important, and it's great to see so many of us here today speaking about all that we can do together, and all the work that's being done in our respective kind of areas and jobs, and to see different people like allies coming together and elevating and just uplifting women's voices. So I think like my final note would obviously be to encourage and not be afraid to stand up for what you believe in terms of getting gender equality when it comes to women in different areas, and also, you know, for those who are non-binary and, you know, gender non-conforming as well. And I think there's a collective body of work that needs to be done, that needs to be placed on our governments, but also a number of different organizations and bodies that can kind of put forward that work and help women to flourish. And of course, the final piece of work is the strong women who don't give up in the spaces that they occupy, even when they're not made for them or built for them, and never giving up in that area. So that is my final piece. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak, and then look forward to the rest.
Thanks, Buki. You have shared great insights. I think the assumptions that we have as a society is really damaging us. We should listen more and have a better empathic understanding of each other. Thank you so much, everyone, for your energizing talks today. I think this is an incredible moment of sharing our thoughts and getting inspired by each other to keep up the great work regarding the gender equality, no matter what. With this, I would allow our speakers to comment or ask questions to each other. So please unmute yourself and take this opportunity.
I actually have a question for Jovantika. I know you mentioned a couple of things at the start, talking about mentorship, which I also think is extremely important in any kind of work that we do, whether it's in politics or businesses and things like that. And I think something that stood out to me when you were speaking was talking about the unconscious biases within allyship, and being able to understand each other's perspectives. And you talked about female and male mentorships and the importance of having women mentor men as well as men mentoring women. So I guess my question is, how do you see that working, or how would that typically work in an environment?
So I think we don't see this happening a lot, happening very often. It's always, there is some kind of, a reservation in our head that, I don't think that he will or she will be able to understand what I want. So I guess this is where our unconscious bias fall in the picture and stop us from doing what could be a successful thing for us. And so I always keep saying that, you always have to try before judging about anything, whether it's a situation, whether it's a task or an exam. I mean, if you don't even try or look at how it's going to happen, I don't think there is any way that can help you solve any problem. So I know, like, we talk a lot about having female mentorship, having a female role model, but there's no harm having a male role model as well for you. At certain point, So I can, being in tech industry, I have a role model, Satya Nadella, for an example. But at the same point, I can also talk about Melinda Gates, because she's another example of a women in tech. She's doing a lot of stuff for women in tech industries, and how the leadership skills have, grown from Melinda, and how she's giving it back out. So I get it does work. The only thing that we need to do is have that positive mindset that unless and until you tell it out to the people, they won't listen, right? So you are sitting in your chamber and you are thinking that I need a mentor, I want an advisor, I need a consulting, services for me because I want to change my role, or I have a gap in my career and I want to move back into the industry. So I need somebody, I need an expert to talk to me. But that's not going to happen if you're just thinking. You have to go outside and talk about it. If you see, for an example, if your manager is somebody you think that would be a perfect ally for you, that will be supporting you, that will be sponsoring you throughout, and you think, you can talk to him or her about the situation regardless of age and gender. So I guess that's going to make a big impact. The only thing that I would say currently that would work is talking it out rather than thinking about it. So what's going to happen? The worst case would be there will be a no. There won't be anything like you won't be shredded out of somewhere. You won't be taken out of the society, that no, you are asking for a male mentor, you won't be getting it at all. That doesn't work like this. We are not in that society. We are in an open-minded society now. Things are becoming more achievable. People are becoming more successful. Everybody's having an open mind situation currently. So I guess there's no harm in asking for help if you need, and just have that open mind regardless of your race, gender, and sex, and just be there out. So that's what would be working, I would say, and it is working based on my personal experience and the people I've been talking to, from younger age to the older age, and I think it's working for them as well. It's just they need to ask, and once they feel comfortable asking, I think they'll get it what they want.
Can I jump in there? I want to ask Bucky a question. Is that okay? Because I have to go at 8:15. So I just unfortunately, I have to collect some medicines from the local pharmacy. So I just want to ask Bucky, because, I was talking about just the issue about the sort of obstacles, but also the sort of supports that women need to run for elections. So you've obviously run for election both locally in Maynooth and then at national level in USI. So what were the things that made a difference for you? The sort of supports or things that were there that made a difference to you, not just in terms of you making the decision to run for election, but also successfully navigating the election process and coming out the other end. I'd be very interested in just hearing your own personal experience in terms of the things or even the people that made a difference to you in terms of your political journey.
It's an incredible question, and thanks so much for that. I appreciate it. I think what was really interesting about both journeys, and I think they overlap quite a bit, is initially, obviously, I took the plunge to decide, and every time I did it, I was like, oh my God, should I have done this? I don't think I should have. You always get the imposter syndrome when you're doing this kind of thing. But I think what was really important for me was obviously have my values and my goals initially going forward, but to always go out and find out what people actually want, what the students needed at that point in time, of course, and align that with those values and obviously my kind of goals. Make sure that I had the zeal and the energy to do it, first of all, and then also to make sure that I was doing it for the right reasons, which was the people. So I think what I did and what helped quite a bit was the community of people who had been in similar positions and talking a lot to them. So I would have scheduled numerous calls, numerous meetings, spoken to so many people. And I suppose that's the equivalent of canvassing in political terms, I suppose. But for me, I think it was really different because I was just genuinely trying to gauge previous experiences of people who had probably come before me in different positions, obviously in like incumbents or predecessors before me who would have taken up my roles, and understanding their experiences. And then I think after that, realizing that my experience was not going to be the same as theirs, because I'm a different person and I come from a different background. And I obviously, for me, it was really different and interesting because all of my success, or all of my predecessors, or all the people who had come before me were not people of color, and they were not from the same kind of background that I would have come from. So I had to obviously go internally and figure out what exactly I was doing this for. But I think the main thing that I saw was definitely getting the support from just being able to build up my confidence and build my knowledge in the area I was going into by speaking to other people would be the main kind of thing. But also understanding that a lot of my goals and my values really aligned with what people needed at the time, and that re-solidified and reignited the passion to know that, okay, what I'm doing is not in vain, and that, you know, my values and my goals and my ideas, people believe in that because that's something that they need just as much as I do. So that was really great. And of course, I attended a lot of webinars, seminars, events, and I got a lot of tips and tricks from different places to help me go forward and feel confident. But of course, it was all a learning process as soon as I got in. So it was great in that sense of the word.
And
that answers you.
Did anybody did you have any mentors or sponsors and as well?
Yeah, I actually did. I think prior to my role coming into this, I actually did have a mentor. I went through a mentorship program actually in political leadership before I came into my role in the USI, and that was dedicated to women migrants essentially. So it was a space that was for me for sure, because I come from a migrant background and a migrant home, and obviously I'm a woman as well and a woman of color, and so I was lucky enough to be able to enter into the Yemi Adenuga mentorship and leadership program. So that was really great for me, because it just ran through all the ins and outs of what it means to overcome your fears, what it means to really, really build your confidence and put yourself out there, and you know, just what it means to know and have the knowledge to go into what you're going to. So mentorship was a key part in actually my roles before coming into them. But I actually did the mentorship programs after I'd won the elections, so that was probably an afterthought more than anything. But yeah.
That's great. As I said, I have to sign off now because it goes. So apologies, but just good luck with the rest of the discussion. And thanks, Bucky, for sharing that. Very interested in hearing that from you.
Thank you so much, Pat, for joining today.
No
and
problem.
Hopefully talk to you soon.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Is there any other questions or comments? Otherwise, I'm going to move to the questions from the audience. Okay, I'm moving to the questions. Please drop your questions quickly if you haven't done it yet. I already have a few questions here for Kathryn. The question is, what are the best practices to overcome gender bias?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Others might also want to come in on this one in terms of best practice on overcoming gender bias. I think for me, it's an openness and a willingness to consider, you know, your behavior and your actions, you know, and just to, you know, take a step back. And, you know, there's a lot of conversations at the moment about, you know, in certain communities or with men, you know, about, you know, men don't know how to behave anymore, or people don't know what, you know, what they're saying might be offensive. And it's like, that's okay. It's okay to have to think about it and consider that and take a moment before you approach somebody or do something or say something. And that's not too much to ask of any of us in terms of how we treat other human beings. So I see that as pretty okay and pretty acceptable thing for us all to have to do, especially when you consider girls, young women, and women of all ages and backgrounds have to make a lot of considerations about how they behave, and the choices we all make in all different parts of our lives in terms of how we keep ourselves safe, how we're going to be perceived, what impact will this have on me or others, you know. So we're always thinking about that and always mulling that over, and that's always a layer in our in our thoughts and in our actions. So if others now have to take that step back, be more considerate in what they do, I think that's very positive. And of course, there's very practical. People can take part in training and all that as well. So there's lots of expert people out there that can help people with thinking about that. At the same time, I wouldn't wait for people to do training. I mean, there's a lot of things that I think people are already aware of that they need to do in order, to make workplaces welcoming, to make sure that they have, spaces and places that are representative of all the people that live on this island. So yeah, I don't know if others might have other contributions on that one.
Thanks, Kathryn. I have another question for Sarah. Is there a way to identify and deal with unconscious gender bias?
Thank you, Afra. I think that Kathryn went through the whole range of measures. There is a lot of training there, and education is crucial. Education from the very early stages can break, because these gender stereotypes, in a way, they are internalized since very early on. So, and these are two important and very effective ways to break unconscious gender bias. Teachers have a big role to play there, as well as family. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. I have another question for Juventica. What is your advice for aspiring female leaders on dealing with obstacles and overcoming various hurdles?
I think the only advice I would give is be confident enough, because that is what we are lacking currently as females. I know a lot of us undermine ourselves that we do not possess the right skill to jump in the industry. So again, it comes on the unconscious bias that we use it on ourselves. We have two perspectives, and most of the time we choose the negative one. We are not optimistic all the time, talking about ourselves, I would say. So I guess the perception of looking at ourselves, perception of looking what we can do or thinking what can we do, is the first step to take towards changing anything outside. So I get aspiring yourself first, being a role model to yourself, and then finding somebody else, because it's really important to identify who you are first as a person, rather than looking for somebody, because unless and until you know that what you are, what you want, I don't think you can go out and ask in the society. So I guess it's more important to identify yourself first, and see what you are lacking and what you want, and how can you build this confidence within you. And if you need somebody to give you an advice, then go for it. Look for people that inspires you, and maybe they can be of help. But yeah, the only advice that I would give at this moment is work towards optimism. See that how can you bring that negative thoughts of yours, negative biases of yours, to positive energy, and work towards the goal then.
Thank you, Juventica. Great advice. My final question is, I have actually a lot of questions today, but considering the time, I will have to leave it to your next Women Empowerment panel. My last question is for Buki. Who is your main inspiration?
This is so sweet. I think my main inspiration has to be my two parents, my mum especially. Oh my gosh, this is such a nice question. Yeah, no, my mother is definitely my biggest inspiration and my biggest supporter as well. I think I'm very lucky and privileged to have a mother like her, who have all the stuff that she has done, and have come to Ireland, and go through all the stuff that she went through as a migrant to get me to where I am today, and support me through my education, And, you know, my professional life and my politics journey, it's not an easy one to kind of go through, but it's been great despite the obstacles. And it's always great to have like an inspiration that can be a support as well. So I think I'm very privileged and lucky, and I'm sure a lot of people would probably echo similar sentiments if they could as well, about their own parents and family and things like that. So yeah.
I can totally resonate with you, Buki. I think I am crippled without my mom, so she's kind of backbone to me as well.
Yes, definitely. Should be happy to hear that as well.
Great to hear this, guys. With this, I would like to say thank you for all the great questions. And I was about to ask your final thoughts, but I think it's better to leave it here and hopefully have another discussion. I think it's a topic that we can talk about and share insights more when we more in another panel. So I just want to say my wish for the future is that there will be no female leaders, but there will be just leaders. I hope you share this wish with me today. We're ending our panel today. As all good things must come to an end. Thank you so much for watching us. And thank you so much to our panelists for joining us today and sharing their insightful opinions. As a closing mark, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to keep up with the future events. Thank you, and happy International Women's Day.
Thank you, everybody.
Same to you. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.